Thank you for having me here today. I want to begin with two numbers, 7318. For more than half a century, the National Election Survey has been asking Americans a simple question. Do you trust the federal government to do the right thing all of the time, or at least most of the time? In 1958, the first year that this survey was conducted, the number was 73. That is, 73% of Americans polled said yes, they trusted their government to do the right thing at least most of the time. Now, for a long time, that number remained high. 1968, of course, was a year of historic convulsions. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy was killed, North Korea captured an American surveillance ship, and North Vietnam launched the Tet Offensive. Faith in government went down, but overall it held firm. 62% still trusted government. After Watergate, trust took a big hit, dropping to 36%. But today, 18. From 73 to 18. Not even 1 in 5 Americans today trust their government to do the right thing. Now, I would love to stand here and tell you this was some sudden drop after Donald Trump was elected, but it wouldn't be true. The problem is far bigger than Trump. And the way I see it, this loss of faith, this broad and this profound, is more than a problem. It is a crisis of faith. This is the kind of crisis that leads people to turn away from democracy, the kind of crisis that forces people to stop believing in what we can do together, the kind of crisis that creates fertile ground for cynicism and discouragement, the kind of crisis that gives rise to authoritarians. So why have so many people lost faith? Thoughtful people give a lot of different answers. Some say it's the result of politicians making government the enemy, and there's some truth in that. Since Watergate, generation after generation of American politicians have attacked the very idea that our government can do anything right. Anyone remember Ronald Reagan's famous line? What are the 9 most terrifying words in the English language? I am from the government and I'm here to help. Really? Government help is terrifying? Give me a break. Do you know what's actually terrifying? Hurricanes like Katrina and Maria are terrifying, which is why the victims of natural disasters ask for government help. After a lifetime of hard work, growing old and going broke is terrifying, which is why the American people strongly support Social Security. Choosing between food and medicine is terrifying, and that's why the American people rise up and take to the streets when Republicans try to cut back Medicare and Medicaid. And there's so much more that we want to work on together. Americans want roads and bridges. They want power and water systems. They want a top-notch economic system. They want real cybersecurity and a military that defends our nation. And they want a government that can deliver those things. Government can be a powerful force for good, but only when it works for the people. And the American people understand that today it doesn't. Our national crisis of faith in government boils down to this simple fact. People don't trust their government to do right because they think government works for the rich, the powerful, and the well-connected, and not for the American people. And here's the kicker. They're right. At a time when this country faces enormous challenges, our government actively serves the richest and the most powerful and turns its back on everyone else. At a time of skyrocketing inequality and stagnant wages for our middle class, our government is giving gargantuan handouts to the wealthiest Americans. At a time when mass incarceration grinds down human beings and destroys communities of color, our government is putting more cash into the for-profit prison industry. At a time when sea levels are rising and the health threats posed by climate change are accelerating by the day, our government is handing over both taxpayer money and federally protected lands to the fossil fuel industry. At a time of staggering drug prices and soaring out-of-pocket costs, our government tucks tail and runs away from any serious challenge to big pharma and greedy insurance companies. At a time of crippling student loan debt, our government is bending over backwards to help bogus for-profit colleges and student loan companies get richer by cheating students. Across the board, our government is failing to fix the problems that face our working families. Instead, it is making the problems worse by giving more money, more power, and more advantages to those who already have all three. And so often, whether it leads to poisoned water or toxic bank loans, communities of color are hit first and hit hardest. Our government systematically favors the rich over the poor, the donor class over the working class, the well-connected over the disconnected. This is deliberate, and we need to call it for what it is: corruption. Plain and simple. Corruption has seeped into the fabric of our government, tilting thousands of decisions away from the public good and toward the desires of those at the top. And over time, bit by bit, like a cancer eating away at our democracy, corruption has eroded Americans' faith in our government. Now, I know that is a stark assessment, but I am not here to describe the death of democracy. I'm here to talk about fighting back. I'm here because I believe that change is hard, but change is possible. Changes can start with reforming how our largest companies operate. And as Angela mentioned, last week I introduced the Accountable Capitalism Act, which would restore the once common idea that giant American corporations should look out for a broad range of American stakeholders. By requiring our largest companies to seat workers on their boards, limiting the ability of executives to get rich off short-term stock price bumps, and giving shareholders and directors a real say in corporate political spending, this bill could go a long way toward restoring real economic democracy. And in the process, it would ensure that when American businesses engage with our government, they are speaking on behalf of their entire communities and not simply as megaphones for the wealthy and the powerful. Getting American corporations to start acting like responsible American citizens is an important first step toward limiting corruption. But much broader changes are needed. So today, I'm introducing the most ambitious anti-corruption legislation proposed in Congress since Watergate. This is an aggressive set of reforms that would fundamentally change the way Washington does business. These reforms have one simple aim: to take power in Washington away from the wealthy, the powerful, and the well-connected who have corrupted our government and put power back in the hands of the American people. We can do this. And when we do, we will restore the faith of the American people, not just in our government, but restore faith in democracy itself. The recent explosion of big political spending has delivered a gut punch to our democracy. And I do what I can by not taking any PAC money or any money from federal lobbyists. And there's a lot of work going on campaign finance, starting with overturning Citizens United. But that's not nearly enough. The corrupting influence of big money in Washington reaches much further than political campaigns. Big money eats away at the heart of our democracy. Now, over the last few years, it has created a pervasive culture of soft corruption that colors virtually every important decision made in Washington. Consider a couple of examples. First, The rich and powerful buy their way into congressional offices. Exhibit A, Mick Mulvaney. After he left Congress, Mulvaney told a room full of bankers that he had a rule in his office. If a lobbyist didn't give him money, the lobbyist didn't get a meeting. He met only with those lobbyists who ponied up for his campaign war chest. Today, Mulvaney is President Trump's head of the Office of Management and Budget. He is the person running the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And when he made these comments right out in public with the press listening in, Trump and pretty much every Republican in Washington just shrugged. The rich and the powerful also offer up some pretty nice gifts for public servants to do their bidding. In the early 2000s, Congressman Billy Tauzin pushed an idea: expand Medicare to cover prescription drugs. Good for seniors. In fact, for many seniors, life-saving. But also very good for big pharma. More prescriptions filled, more money coming in. And it might have all landed there, with seniors getting drug coverage and companies selling more and more drugs. But big pharma, they wanted more. Number one on their list was a flat prohibition on the worrisome possibility that the government might actually negotiate for lower drug prices. And Billy delivered, which I'm sure had nothing to do with the more than $200,000 in campaign contributions that the congressman had received from the drug industry. Okay, so today, Big Pharma rakes in billions from seniors on Medicare while charging sky-high prices for the drugs they need, and no one in government can negotiate those prices. So what happened to Billy? Well, in December of 2003, the very same month that the bill was signed into law, Pharma, the drug company's biggest lobbying group, dangled the possibility that Billy could be their next CEO. And then what happened? In February of 2004, Congressman Tauzin announced that he wouldn't seek re-election. 10 months later, he became CEO of Pharma at an annual salary of $2 million. You know, Big Pharma certainly knows how to say, thank you for your service. Sometimes the payoff comes right up front. Goldman Sachs handed Gary Cohn over $250 million on his way out the door to become the head of President Trump's National Economic Council. $250 million to help quarterback a tax package that included giveaways worth just over $250 million to Goldman in the first quarter of 2018 alone. That's quite a return on investment for Goldman Sachs. For the taxpayers who paid Mr. Cohn's salary and were under the mistaken impression that Mr. Cohn was working for them, the return was not so good. Yet, the examples are everywhere these days. A commerce secretary who acts like a cartoon version of a Wall Street fat cat, awash in financial conflicts intertwined with Russian financial interests, suspected of swindling millions from his business partners, and using his official position to pump up his fortune through shady stock trading. An EPA administrator who resigns in disgrace over corruption, only to be replaced with another EPA administrator who belongs in the coal barons' hall of fame. A congressman facing indictment for insider trading. Let's face it, there is no real question that the Trump era has given us the most nakedly corrupt leadership this nation has seen in our lifetimes. But they are not the cause of the rot. They're just the biggest, stinkiest example of it. Corruption is a form of public cancer, and Washington's got it bad. It's time for treatment, time to isolate and quarantine the ability of big money to infect the decisions made every day by every branch of our government.